Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of our weekly Exploring the Parasha class with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz and Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
This week's Parasha is Parashat Vayakhel, and we are going to be talking about a part of the Parsha that actually I referenced, though we're going to be taking a different spin on it, in Midrasha yesterday. But because I didn't get to tell this story to everybody and I didn't podcast that class, I'm going to share this story because Rabbi Shapiro will also think it's very funny and maybe remember it. When I applied to Temple Beth Am, I wrote a cover letter. And in the cover letter, I said that I was excited, based on my experience as an intern, to bring back to Temple Beth Am Chochmah, Bina, and Dat. And, we're going to bring up those words in just a moment.
Because she's part of Chabad. Surprise!
I didn't know that Chabad's acronym was because of Chochmah, Bina, and Dat. So Rabbi Adam Klickfeld called me after receiving the cover letter and said, Rabbi Schatz, I am so excited to see how you are going to bring Chabad to Temple Beth Am during your interview week. And
You're very from. I'm
very from. So the rest is history, but that is the verse we are going to be looking at today.
And that's why we are turning Temple Beth Am into a Chabad center on La Cienega and Olympic. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining our food podcast and our important announcement.
Great. Okay. Do you want to do this or do you want me to do it?
I got it.
Okay, great.
I'm just hungry now. Sorry.
Well, teach the class and then you can go eat.
I want to eat now. I'm hungry. I haven't had my snacks yet. Maybe that's why. Okie dokie. My computer is back slow again. Should we explain to people why I'm back in a slow computer?
No.
It started raining in my office last week, everybody.
Or yes, I guess.
It literally started raining in my office. I can share the video at the end of class when we are
offline.
When we're offline. Yeah. It's dramatic. Okay. As we referenced probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, the instructions for building the Mishkan, the tabernacle, basically happen twice, essentially, right? And there are slight differences, but the two parshiot before last week's parsha, and now this week and next week, give us a lot of detail in the construction of the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary in which the presence of God would dwell as the Israelites went about their wanderings. It's going to be a little tricky to find stuff when we've already talked about how to build this, but Rabbi Schatz already told you where we're going. It's going to be great. All right, Rabbi Schatz?
Right.
Great. Feel the excitement coming out of Rabbi Schatz's Louisiana home. The Schatz Bayou, if you will.
Definitely not in Louisiana.
So after last week, kind of an eventful Parsha, Moses brings everybody together and he talks to them about how, interestingly, he starts by saying what builds community is Shabbat, and starts actually giving a few more guidelines in terms of what Shabbat is. If you go back to the 10 Commandments, you'll see that there's actually not a lot of guidance in terms of how you should actually observe Shabbat. It says here you shouldn't light fire during the Shabbos. I will just say very briefly, I thought about these verses for today. Like we talk about Shabbat in a variety of forms. We have services on Shabbat, but there's what to explore in terms of how we create meaningful Shabbat experiences for ourselves, which is an active conversation that we've been having as we try to figure out what Shabbat at TBA looks like coming out of COVID. I was having a conversation with a congregant as I'm starting to do like family programming back in my department. And she said something like, it's so great that we're doing this stuff. Shabbat's not supposed to be by yourself. Shabbat is a team sport, which I really like.
So true.
This is like, and Moses bringing all the people together, right? Vayakhel Moshe et kol adat bnei Yisrael. Like he's bringing everybody together to say.
Don't talk about that too much. I'm doing that tomorrow for Beitenu.
Great. Never mind. We're going to go back in the podcast and erase that part. Shabbat is a team sport. Hooray for Shabbos in general and hooray for Shabbos in community. Did I spoil your punchline, Rabbi Schatz?
No, that was great. That had nothing to do with anything.
I get that a lot. So then after we hear a bit about Shabbat, Moses moves into, a set of instructions that we've seen a very, very, very similar version of recently about taking these gifts, everyone whose heart so moved them, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, these precious items, the goat's hair and the ram skins and the dolphin skins and the spices and the lapis lazuli. Did I get that right, Rabbi Schatz?
Indeed.
Very good. And everyone who is skilled, Chacham Lev, should come and create this beautiful creation. The arks, its poles, the table, its utensils, the lampstand, the altar, and all. I'm not going to just read off everything you make. I'm making a lot of stuff. The tabernacle, they're making a lot of stuff. Moses lays all that out. They go out, right, by Tzukol about the Israel Milifnei Moshe. They all go out to create it. And everyone whose spirit so moved them came to bring this offering. Men and women, there's what to explore here in terms of how women are specifically mentioned, in terms of how this is constructed, whether explicit or implicit. The Torah is a very male-heavy text, to say the least. So always noteworthy when it says everybody's doing this, right? Men and women together.
Male-centered.
What?
Male-centered.
Sure, we can go with that. Vaguely misogynistic. Can we do that as well?
Yeah, I think that male heavy implies that we're constantly talking about men, which we're not. But when we do talk about gender, it's very male centered. That's all I was getting at.
Yes. Well, even in terms of verbs and all that good stuff.
Right.
But that's another class for another day. We should do that class another day. And everyone comes forward making these gifts. The women spinning with their own hands, bringing forth the yarn. Okay, it's a little stereotypical in terms of gender roles, but that's great. They're making some yarn and the goat hair, and people are bringing their things forward, right? Everyone who starts to move them, like leaning on that phrase again and again, that the people are coming forward, are bringing their offerings towards this project. Now we're going to get into the two verses that we're going to be exploring in a bit more depth today. Rabbi Schatz, can I share do you want to show us now? I'm going to share it now. There's a teaching that I really, really love on the construction of the tabernacle that I learned from Rabbi Ruth Sohn. It's a teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, because, it's a big project and people brought a lot of stuff forward. I think it's more on Pekude, which is next week, but I'm not going to be here next week. I am hypothetically going to be in Israel, so I'll share it now. That everyone brought something different to this process, but after they brought it forward and after it was completed, when they all turned to look at it, no one could see what they brought individually. They could only see the collective project that they had created together, which is a really, really lovely teaching about the balance and the role of the individual and the communal, right? We each have something to bring forward. And ideally, we get to a place that when we look at what we've created and what we've brought, we see not just what we did individually, but what we've done as a group. I think that that's really, really lovely. But that is, as they say, not really what we're talking about today. I just wanted to share it because it's a lovely teaching. Okay, chapter 35, verses 30 and 31. Vayomer Moshe b'nei Yisrael, Re'u, kara Adonai b'shem, Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur lemate Yehuda. Moses says to the Israelites, see, behold, God has singled out by name Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur, like this craftsman who is named Betzalel and gives his lineage. He's from the tribe of Judah. Vayimale oto ruach Elohim. He has filled him with the Spirit of God, with a divine spirit, as it's translated here. Bechochma, bitfuna, uveda'at, uvechol mlacha. As soon as you translate these words, it gets a little tricky because, in some ways it's saying with intelligence, and with intelligence, right? And there are different types of knowing, which is a big part of what I believe we're going to be talking about today, depending on how things unfold. So he has the Spirit within him with, I'll just read off the translation here, and we can sort of pepper in our understandings of it, with skill, with ability, and with knowledge, uvechol melacha, and in every kind of craft. I'll point out sort of a quick thing and then a general framing, and then I'll turn it over to Rabbi Schatz. It is interesting to me, I just noticed reading through that first verse, that the et nachta, if you'll forgive the trope exploration for a second, right? The et nachta is like the comma, right, in a verse in the Torah. You would think that the et nachta would go with Betzalel, right? Behold, God has called out the name of Betzalel. It's interesting to me. I don't know quite what to make of it. It says, behold, God has called the name. Pause. Betzalel. It's just, I don't know, Rabbi Schatz, if you notice that, but I think it's sort of a funky punctuation-y type of thing. I don't know what to make of it, but I just noticed reading it through. In terms of the bigger picture conversation, I think one of the pieces that I'm interested in here is when we think about what it is to know and understand and gain insight into the world, there are different ways of thinking about our experience and trying to understand what's happening around us. And I think it's a worthy and important conversation to explore the different ways in which we learn and gain understanding and think about how we can sort of have the meta conversation about how we build and hone those skills that we need to have to deepen our understanding of the world. I can riff on that, but I will pause and turn it over to Rabbi Rebecca Schatz.
Any kushiot, any questions about these two verses? Yes, Tybal.
Those of us that do genealogy, aside from the patriarchs where we get the grandfather, do either of you or anyone happen to know, is this unusual where we're not just hearing the usual patronymic, but we hear the father's patronymic, and what that significance would be when it's not the patriarchs?
I don't know, other than to say I think there are other times in Torah where we hear like lines going further and further back when they're introducing someone of renown. I don't know why specifically Betzalel, but I think it does show a certain element of his status that we not only know his name, but we know where he comes from twofold. I don't have a more direct answer than that, but that is my sense. Any other kushiot or questions? Kushiot are questions. That was redundant. On these two verses. Okay. Well, oh yes, Karen.
You might have said something. Why him?
Great. I don't have so many sources on that answer. That's actually the class that I taught yesterday morning. So I'm happy to send you the source sheet that I used. But it's a great question. Why this guy? What does he have other than these artistic and knowledgeable aspects of his character? But why him? Why was he singled out by God? And also his name. I don't think we've said this yet. Betzalel means in the shade of God, right? Or as someone pointed out, I think it was Denise actually in class yesterday, it also makes us think of B'Tselem Elohim, right? There are definitely letters missing, but just being in the shadow of God or in the image of God is, this guy is very connected to God, both in name and also in being chosen for this work. So again, happy to send you the source sheet. Maybe Rabbi Shapiro has stuff on this. I don't specifically on his name, or why this guy, but I can send you some stuff after. Other thoughts, comments, questions really is all I'm asking for, but I guess thoughts and comments are good too. Okay.
Paula, can I ask something?
Oh yeah, sorry. I didn't see you.
I didn't raise my hand. That's fine.
Oh, well,
so does this mean that God, like he picked and chose this man? Like he could do, God, in Rabbi Rousseau's words, Adonai, the living presence, could do this to anybody with any abilities, these particular skills and the knowledge of every kind of craft.
Right.
But it could be in anything, in singing, so as opposed to, we can cultivate these things. We don't have to be endowed with these things. So It's interesting to me that there's this endowment here.
Great. Yeah. I think maybe this is what Rabbi Shapiro is going to get at in terms of the mental health piece, like knowing that you have these skills versus someone else helping you to recognize that you have these skills, I think is actually very powerful. I've shared a few times, and Rabbi Shapiro does not like when I do this during the Kushia section, but I'm going to do it. I've shared a few times.
It's okay. I just shared a random teaching that even had nothing to do with the Parsha that before I even got into it. So it's a scattered day.
So we're on the same page.
We're locked in. Yeah.
When I was in high school, I somehow, based on scheduling, was put into a choir class with all upperclassmen. And though I can sing and I knew I could sing, I did definitely at 14 years old or whatever it was, had no confidence in really anything, because as a 14-year-old girl, you don't. And so I definitely did not feel very confident in my talent in a room full of people who had been doing this for 3 or 4 years. And I was very shy and I wasn't excited to sing. I wasn't excited to do anything. And the teacher, who is since become a very good family friend of ours and a very close mentor, singled me out and put me in front of the class and had me lead something. And I was mortified and I hated him for doing it. And then I went to school in college to become a music teacher and a conductor. And I think that sometimes people can see a talent in you that you can't see in yourself, and knowing how to draw that out, whether it's a skill or a talent, those are different things, but being able to draw those things out of you is very different than, as you're pointing out, Paula, something that you kind of know that you have, and whether or not you use it is very different than someone saying, I see this in you, you should go and either perfect it or use it. And in this case, God saying to Bezalel, create for me a home based on these skills that you have. Mike and then Renee.
Is it sort of like Bezalel's like the music director of the symphony, and all the players are asked to contribute their part. But like if you took the LA Phil and you ask any of the players about, or if they were playing in a small ensemble, they would have their own special skill and you would hear them. They play differently when they're playing in the orchestra.
Sure.
As a whole and under the direction of the music director. And, it's a special skill that that person has, is the one that's chosen as the music director.
Sure.
That brings out not just the individual, but the individual as a group, like what Rabbi Shapiro was referring to in his teaching there about the collective group. You couldn't see the individual maybe, but you can still hear them, and
right. Yeah, I think that in terms of Bezalel, what we get a little bit later on is that he's partnered with Oholiav, and what we know of that partnership is that they really complement one another in terms of one being able to do the artistry and the other one being able to teach others to do the artistry. So, that the conductor metaphor that you're using, or music director that you're using, you could also use for like the CEO of a business or the manager of a company, right? You need to be able to, as the leader, bring people in. But of course, you have to also be the one who has those skills that the company or the choir, whatever metaphor we're using here, needs to be able to perfect that, right? The community then needs to be, or the employees, whatever, need to be able to follow that direction. And so you also need to be able to have those skills. You just might not be able to be the one who's also doing it from the inside. So I think that you're getting at a very interesting aspect of kind of the artist behind the work, right? And what it takes to be Bezalel in this moment to create this tabernacle. Renee and then Denise, and then Rabbi Shapiro will share something, and then I'll share something, and yeah.
Okay, so two things. One, it occurs to me that it could be related to like nature versus nurture. You know, he has certain inborn traits that he was born with, and so if he already had that skill, then it was just the given his circumstances, it just made it even more come out more. And also, you know, with the Hashem part of it, you know, I personally believe that Hashem gives each of us our own special koachs and what we're good in. And that was his. And just like I mentioned yesterday, like with Moses and Aaron, you know, they got paired together because one had one specific skill set and the other had the other, and they kind of complemented each other. And I think that's what happens here as well.
Great. Beautiful. Yeah, Denise.
So I'm noticing it says first that Hashem singled out by name Bezalel.
Yeah.
And then it says that he was endowed with a divine spirit of skill.
Yeah.
So it just seems like a reverse order, like it feels counterintuitive to list it that way, rather than saying, look, Hashem sees this guy is filled with Ruach Elokim, Chachma Bina Dat, and therefore he's singled out by name, you know?
Yeah. That is very interesting. I've never noticed that before, but you're right that, you know, instead of putting the art before the artist, right, we're getting to know the guy and then saying all the things that he's good at. So maybe this is a very different theme than the one that Rabbi Shapiro had put out for us, but maybe this is something having to do with like how we present ourselves, right? Do we first present ourselves as the person that we are or the things that we can do? And then people get to know who we are based on those things. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I think what I was reflecting on looking at the verses, you know, Bezalel is named, and then there's that interesting phrase, Vayimale oto ruach Elohim, right? He's singled out, and then it's like God pours this stuff, like God filled him up with this stuff, right? Which Denise, to your point, you think it would be the other way, right? Like God fills him with this stuff and then says, hey, look at this guy who's got all this great stuff. He's going to go do it. I think it connects a bit to Rabbi Schatz's, you know, story of learning by doing, right? Sometimes, hey, this is the person, go learn how to do it. And I think, you know, Renee, in terms of what you were saying, there is an interesting like nature versus nurture piece to that too, right? Is it that this is stuff that was innate within Bezalel that was then brought out? Or did God kind of notice, hey, this seems like this might be a person who could really take on this, you know, captaining this project, and then sort of supplementing his innate, you know, skills with all this additional stuff to bring that out in him. I want to like dive into the Chochma, Bina, Da'at, Bina. I'm noticing your name. Like, so we've got Bina on the call. All we need is Chochma and Da'at, and we'll be complete.
We have that with our two rabbis.
Oh, very nice.
That was very sweet.
Inaccurate.
Now we'll just fight over who is who.
Yeah. Rabbi Schatz is Chochma and Da'at, and we have Bina, and also Matt Shapiro.
You both have part of each of those qualities.
That's spoiling my punchline. I'll make the argument that we can all cultivate all of those qualities. So that's my punchline. You can log off now. One thing is, it's interesting for me to note the phrase Ruach Elohim on there. Right, for those of you who know the earliest part of Bereshit, well, Ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim, vayomer Elohim yor vayior.
How do you know that by heart?
That's your Solomon Schechter Day School outside of.
Very impressed. Never been more impressed.
Well, that's a nice low bar to clear. So at the very beginning of Breshit, that specific phrase is used, and it's a relatively unusual phrase. And there's a lot written about the parallels between the creation of the tabernacle itself and the creation of the world, or the sense that the tabernacle is the world in miniature. And so this idea that there's a specific element of God that is kind of being brought into the world for this project to move forward, and you know that's a very texty thing, but I do think it's also interesting to think about for ourselves in terms of our own endeavors. What are the specific pieces, Renee? I mean, I also resonate with your sense that we each have a unique mission, role, purpose to play in this world, and how do we access, you know, a specific piece of godliness as we go about carrying that task out. I think that that's an interesting piece. Somebody was asking about why, Tybal, was it you who was asking about like the genealogical elements? If I have my secondary biblical characters in narrative correct, I believe Hur was the other person when Bnei Israel were originally fighting Amalek, and they would win when Moses had his hands up, and they would lose when he had his hands down, and right, he couldn't do it by himself. So Aharon, and I think it's Hur, helped lift his arms up so that Bnei Israel could win that battle, right? And so I do think it's very interesting that Bezalel is being specifically cited as a descendant of Hur as he's about to go into this project, right? And so Moses is sort of surrounded by this presence, Aharon, who would become the high priest to execute the duties within the Mishkan, and Hur, one of his descendants is Bezalel, who would actually create the Mishkan itself, right? So this really interesting idea that, you know, I'm sort of riffing on this, right? But that in order for Bnei Israel to fulfill their duty to win the battle that they needed to win, there's the physical construction, and then there's the execution, and then the sort of human element of that. That's a riff. I don't know if anyone else notices that, but it seems interesting. So, you know, we'll let that float around and see if it takes for anybody. Rabbi Schatz, before we riff on like the Chochmah Bina Da'at piece a bit, did you have anything that you wanted to chime on in with?
I was listening so intensely, I didn't have my sheet open. So give me 30 seconds. I don't think anything specifically off that topic.
Cool.
I have an Ibn Ezra on. Okay, yeah, I'll show this. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this is an Ibn Ezra piece on Vayimaleh, right? Rabbi Shapiro, before the little drash he just gave, was talking about how God really fills him up with these elements. I saw that there was a chat, and I was worried that I had just scooped a piece of Torah for Rabbi Shapiro, but he was just praising Paula. So what Ibn Ezra says is God bore witness that Bezalel was saturated with wisdom, right? He's actually using that word. If we go up to the verse here for a second, he's using the word re'u, not to just be that you're going to see that this is his name, but that that God saw that Bezalel was actually full of these things. So saturated with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, and in addition was skilled in all manner of workmanship. And I thought this was very interesting because we read Vayimaleh as God putting these things into Bezalel, but the way in which it's actually being read by this commentator is that God noticed that Bezalel was full of these things, right? And so God somehow enhanced them to make them full, right, in Bezalel. So it actually, I didn't even think about this commentary when I shared that story about choir, but had I not been put in front of the room to be told that this was something that I should do, those skills and those abilities would have been in me, and I would have sung and it would have been fine, but I wouldn't necessarily have been filled with an understanding of the fact that this was something I could do. And so what Ibn Ezra, I think, is saying here is this idea of Vayimaleh, this idea of filling up, is that God saw the elements of these pieces in Betzalel and then really filled him with them. And I don't know, I think that's so much nicer than thinking about like an empty vessel that you fill with something, but that it actually already exists and you decide to top it off, so to speak. You decide to enhance it. Yeah, Nancy.
Well, piggybacking on that, I guess, I think it's interesting that it doesn't talk about inspiration until afterwards. And you can be filled with lots of skill. You can be, have all this knowledge and understanding, but if you don't have the passion to do it, the inspiration, the passion, you're not going to. And so I just like, it isn't spoken about until much later or, than what we're seeing. And so, I just thought that was interesting because you need that part in order to actually complete the project. Sure.
It's a really interesting statement. And I think a lot of it actually has to do with how we translate the words chokhmah, bina, and da'at, because chokhmah is wisdom. Bina is a type of,
You want me to try this?
No. Oh, I mean, you can try, sure.
Oh, no, you can go.
No, you do it.
I want to hear what you were going to say.
Wait, I actually wrote it down because I always get the three words mixed up. No, go. What were you going to say?
Nah, it's more fun to let you figure it out.
Just the idea that chacham is like smarts and ability, right? And bina is a type of actual wisdom, like having wisdom of something, and then da'at is a general knowledge understanding. And so I think that Rabbi Shapiro does not like that. Okay, you go.
Not that I don't like it. That's not my. I have heard it explained it differently.
Okay, well,
but I defer to my colleague first.
Oh, thank you.
To then tell her why she's wrong.
So that's fine. You can tell me why I'm wrong. But what I was going to say is I think that bina in that list is actually the passion, right? Is actually that element. You are right that it is brought out separate from that list, later on. But the idea of knowing that it's not just about actual ability to know, this screw goes into that hole with that, bolt at the end of it. Is it called a bolt, a nut? Anyway, I clearly build lots of things. But knowing that is definitely a type of knowledge, right? And at the same time, a passion to do the work is, to me at least, in the word bina. Is in this general kind of, why am I doing it? What is it for? What's the general goal and like thing that makes me excited to continue with this passion project? So you're totally right. And I think that part of it gets lost in the translation that we are using like synonyms across, as opposed to really making each one of these three words feel like a different aspect of the reason that ultimately he does the project. Now tell me why I'm wrong, Rabbi Shapiro.
No, you're wrong. You're great. You're great. Look, they're Hebrew words that we can translate lots of different ways. So there's no one way to eat a Reese's on this for sure. My understanding, my sense of it is that chokhmah is like information, right? Like a lot of facts, a lot of stuff. If you have chokhmah, you've acquired a lot of like knowledge. Bina is then starting to sort of make connections from that practical knowledge out into the world. Like Denise put in the chat, insight. It's insight, and I've also seen it explained as like logical reasoning, right? Like you're kind of starting to put together the facts and figures and basic information that that you've gleaned. And then da'at is the highest form of that. That sort of, it's like, it's an escalation. There's chokhmah, then there's bina, then there's da'at. And da'at is really when you're able to integrate the facts and the insights into like a lived wisdom of the facts and the deductions, and then you're really able to put that together. Rabbi Schatz is making a face at me, but that's okay.
Yeah, I think you still need inspiration, or that artist doesn't create.
Total. And so what I would say to you, Nancy, in terms of that, is that I think that that's the Ruach Elohim, and that the Ruach Elohim is motivating all of that, right? That the Ruach Elohim is what brings that out to then fuel that piece. I'll say two more things about that. Well, I'll say two more things about that. But before I say two more things about that, I'll say one more thing about that, which is that I think
that's 3 things. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, but it's one, then it's two. The one thing I'll say about that writ large is that I think it's an interesting question, and Bina appropriately has prompted me on this before in this class, in terms of like, that's great, Shapiro. How does that actually help me live my life better? Always a great question. I think it's important to cultivate all of those types of thinking about the world and understanding the world. We should always be learning more. We should always be learning more facts. We should always be gaining more knowledge. We should be working on our Bina. We should be working on the connections, the extrapolations, the relational pieces between that information. And we should be working towards da'at. How do we put all the pieces together so that we can have a deeper understanding, not just of the information, not just of those connections, but really thinking more deeply about the world around us. Those are all slightly different things. Those are all slightly different ways of processing information and thinking about the world around us. And they're each really important. Two more things on that. One is, I'm reading a really interesting book right now called Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. It's a new book that's out. He's sort of like a sociologist. He looks at sort of different trends in the world. He's written about addiction. He's written about depression. And this book is about sort of noticing how easily distracted all of us are collectively, and what do we do about that? And he talks about the exponentially increased amount of information we have access to right now. It's crazy. The sheer amount of information we're exposed to on a daily basis is more than people used to get in like a week or a month, right? There's just so much data streaming at us all of the time, and it's extremely overwhelming and really difficult to parse through, and in some ways impacts our ability to really focus. And I think that that's an interesting piece to hang on to as we're talking about this, right? Like, I don't know if everything you read on the internet is chokhmah. That's not what I'm saying. But there's an abundance of facts. Great. How do you sift through those facts? How do you sift through that information to get to some insight and then to get to some wisdom? There's no shortage of information right now. But we don't necessarily, I'll speak for myself, like I'm always, especially like there's a crisis in the world happening right now. There's a war in the world right now. There's a ton of information coming at us. There's still a pandemic. There's a ton of information coming at us. Just being a person in the world, there's a ton of information coming at us. And so it's a really important question to ask, okay, what's the information that I'm going to focus on, and how do I distill that down into insight and then hopefully into wisdom? I think that's a really, really, really important question. The other thing I'll say that I love about this verse is that we usually talk about chokhmah, bina, and da'at, but it's not just that. I'll pull up the verse one more time. If you look at the end of verse 31, it says, uvechol melacha, right? And the way it's translated is in every kind of craft. But I would translate that a bit differently, right? That God fills, the Spirit of God, the Ruach Elohim endows him, fills him up with knowledge, with insight, and with wisdom, and with the knowledge of how to do it. It's not enough just to have the intellectual knowledge and to have the intellectual insight and the intellectual wisdom. You got to know how to actually bring that out in the world, right? Otherwise, it's all just in your head. And I think that, it's I love the heady stuff as much as anybody. I think there's a collective awareness of that, and it's not just okay. What can you learn and what can you gain insight to and what can you have wisdom on? how are you then going to implement that in the world, right? Bezalel could have all the skill all the wisdom on the planet, but if he didn't know how to actually create the tabernacle, it's useless. I can have all the wisdom in the world, but unless I know how to really implement that and bring that out, right? I can learn, I can read a lot of books, I can gain a lot of insight, but unless I know how to share that, and unless I know how to live that, it's all just noise. And so I think that that's a really important phrase that closes out that verse. There were a lot of hands that went up while I was sharing that. So I'm very interested to hear what other people have to say. Denise, Rebecca, Bina, Michael, let's go.
Just a question, because when you had the screen share up a minute ago, and I saw the word melacha, and I wondered if that's the same as like on Friday night melacha, and then it kind of relates back because it's creative work and it's, I don't know, it feels almost like a statement on art that like helps create the world, kind of. I don't know. So I was just wondering if that's the same word or not.
It is the same, and it's exactly the connection that you just made. So when we hear the word melacha, Rabbi Shapiro mentioned this at the beginning of the Parsha, that we go straight from building the tabernacle into 6 days a week you should work, and then on the 7th day you should rest, which seems like a really bizarre transition. But because we get the word melacha later on, the rabbis make this connection of all the things that we did to create the tabernacle become the things that we are not allowed to do on Shabbat. So sewing and building and hammering and all those kinds of things, those become the 39 melachot for all of Shabbat that we are not supposed to do between Friday night and Saturday night. So you are spot on, and that is exactly where that word comes from.
I want to point out, Paula made an interesting comment in the chat because we've been having this conversation about like, where does the inspiration come from? Paula wrote, inspiration, I find that frequently I just have to sit and do. And then if I'm lucky, I get inspiration.
Yeah.
It makes me think of a Stephen King quote, who's of course like a really prolific author. And Stephen King said about writing, amateurs sit around and wait for inspiration. The rest of us just get up and go to work. Right? That you can want to be inspired, and that's no knock on inspiration. It's great to be inspired. And sometimes you just got to show up and get to work, and the inspiration hopefully will emerge from like getting into doing the business of what needs to be done. And I think that that's an interesting sort of counterbalance to that. Thanks for that, Paula. Rebecca.
So I have a few things to say. It's been gathering, and I've been having to run back and forth to the kitchen. So hopefully I'm not repeating something.
You should pull a Renee and just set up shop in the kitchen.
Yeah. I am baking a new type of challah, so I'm worried about it. So, but what kind of challah? It's a challah that has tahina in it, which is supposed to make it softer. So we'll see.
All right, let us know how it goes.
Yeah. But I wanted to go back to the Chokhmah, Tvuna, and Dat piece, because my interpretation is sort of like yours, Rabbi Shapiro, but not quite. I feel like it's the steps towards being able to, so you start with Chokhmah, which is sort of your inner powers, your intellect, and then Tvuna, which I associate with the word Havana and with the word Litbonen, to look at things. So the ability to understand what you see, so to be looking and understanding. And then Da'at is that step where you actually have an opinion about something. And so it's sort of those 3 steps, and then you can do some work, which is Melacha. And then in the with regard to the inspiration, I think later they use the words Chacham Lev, which is sort of, I feel, might be that angle sort of a thing. So you know everything, and then you also have sort of this a more of a heart, an understanding in your heart rather than in your mind of what to do. So that was my take of it.
I really like that. I also really like the idea of connecting Chokhmah and Chacham Lev. Maybe that's why I translated the way that I did, because I do think that to be smart, the way that we use it colloquially is like, oh, that was such a smart statement. But it actually, this is where I disagree with Rabbi Shapiro on his translations. I actually think the dot is more like, 2 + 2 = 4. I think that's just not, you know that, it's a fact. You know that that's something that it is. But I actually think that Chokhmah is more like wisdom, that's something that you might know that 2 + 2 = 4, but the wisdom that you have behind that is how you can actually get to 4 in different ways, right? That's obviously a very basic example, but the wisdom that you have, that you might have behind something. And so when we get Chacham Lev, it's not just the smarts that you have, but it's actually that, to go back to Nancy, like that inspiration, that wherewithal of whether you're in a community and you're trying to create things for those around you, like it's a sensitivity almost, that wisdom for being able to like read the room, right? Know what's going on so that you can respond to it. And Chacham Lev is exactly that, like having that connection through feeling and through understanding, but it's a different kind of understanding than just factual understanding. Bina. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, I muted. Hello, everybody. I am new here, and I apologize if I'm very immature.
She'll come back.
Everything is frozen, so I don't know.
There you go. Go ahead.
All right.
You were just saying that you're new to all this.
Oh, wait. I can't hear you.
Oh,
I cannot hear you. What's happening?
He can hear you.
Can you hear us now?
Are you talking? I cannot hear you. I don't know what happened. Okay. Can you hear me? I cannot hear you. I have no idea what happened. Okay. Should I just? No. Yeah, I'll wait. So I'll take my turn later, I think.
Can you hear us? No. Okay. Mike, and I'll chat to her.
I just want to, this discussion makes me want to give a big call out to both Rabbi Shapiro and Rabbi Schatz, because, I'm in Boston, or whether I'm in Boston or San Antonio or Brooklyn. I wouldn't be on these calls if it wasn't for the chukmah, whatever you want to call it, that you give us each week. And then we take that. And you take a pasuk out of a particular, you both decide on what you're going to concentrate on, something that is related to mental health. And then we take that in. Not only are you filled with that, but then you fill us with that. And then it is, like Rabbi Shapiro says, it's our responsibility, or what you hope is that somehow that helps us process to act in this world. And that's what I see happening. And that's why I'm here. And that's what you do every week after week. So yasher koach for it, because that's your role. And Batzalel was chosen because he had special qualities to get that out of people, to get them to think, to get them to realize what they had inside each of them. And that, in a sense, then it comes out, hopefully if it works right. There was in 1986, I made my first trip to Israel, took my dad. And it wasn't his first trip. He actually had been once before. But we were on this huge Federation mission. And the executive director of the Federation got me in the back of the bus. And he said, if you're able to pay your Federation pledge all at once, you're not giving enough. And I thought, my goodness, I actually was angry at the time. I said, how can you say something like that? But it was the kind of thing that that really, in some way, brought us all to, or brought a lot of us on that trip to make a commitment to do things in our community and with our shul and with our federation. And I see that, in a very strong way at Temple Beth Am, and whether it's Refugee Shabbat or Kol Tefillah or a regular Shabbat. It's happening because of the work that you guys put in. So Yasher Koach. And we occasionally, hopefully, we act and we think about what we're doing in interaction with other people in our family or interaction with others in our community. And hopefully we build things better in the future. And I think you're right, Rabbi Shapiro, about the issue of everything. There's so much information being pushed at us each day. But I think the fact that what's different about, I'll just say something about a book that I'm just started. It's called The Quiet Before by Gal Beckerman. He used to be at the New York Times, and now he's at the Atlantic. And he talks about what makes social media so important and then so disappointing at times. And and he brings up the Samizdat, the notes that were passed by the refuseniks in the Soviet Union back at that time. And I sometimes think that it's, our Jewish texts and our Torah and our Talmud and our Midrash that are alive now as they were back then. It's something that was more alive, and those people made those actions in some respects more successful than some of the things that happen in social media nowadays. We have a higher, thank God we have Zoom and then we're able to do these kind of things. But when you're dealing with a higher authority or something bigger than ourselves, then if it comes out right and we learn and study, then we become better stewards of that tradition ourselves. I hope that made sense.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very, a very beautiful a connection to both our community and to the outside world, and to how you are in both of those arenas. And I think a lot of people, from what I was seeing, were really appreciative of the words that you were sharing and agreed a lot with what you were sharing. So thank you for doing so. And I wish that we could just say, oh, and that's it, because that was a great endorsement for this class. But I also will, not to get too sappy about things, but I know that Rabbi Shapiro and I really appreciate what you just said, and that others on this call have said it to us as well. And I think that we do it because of that Chacham Lev that I was talking about a few minutes ago. We see this as something that is filling other people up. And so we continue to do it because it is great for us and we really enjoy it. But if it wasn't great for other people and didn't somehow inspire them or make them feel like their Shabbat was going to be off to a great start, we wouldn't. So the passion is reciprocal in all the best ways, that we find that passion because we know that it's something that is being enjoyed. So thank you for continuing to join us. And those of you on the podcast who haven't yet, you should. Okay, Bina, if you can hear us, feel free to share, and then Renee, and then we'll wrap up.
Rabbi Shapiro, I really like the point that you made about this world to be so overwhelmed with all the information. And let me just touch it just a little bit. I came from Ukraine, from Odessa, 30 years ago, 1991. And what's happening now, I'm not going to go into it, but I'm just saying, all this information right now about this, but we have so much of this information bombarding our brain. Can you talk a little more about the connection about this point of yours to the weekly Parsha that we're talking about? I can just not see the connection. Can you please?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll hang on to that, and we can hear from Renee, and then I'll try to wrap us up. Is that okay?
Sure.
But I want to be mindful of the time, and I want to address that, and I want to make sure Renee has an opportunity to share. But yes, absolutely. Just let's hear from Renee, and then I'll try to bring it all together.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say, but it doesn't really make sense now anymore, but that it relates back to something you guys said earlier, that there are a lot of people that we probably all know who are intellectually quite intelligent, but they don't have that, the chokhmah or the bina that's necessary to exist in the world. But they may be like book smart, but not world smart. That's it.
Sure.
Yeah. I think, Rabbi Schatz and I joke about this, in terms of different types of learners. There are also different types of intelligence, right? There's emotional intelligence, there's artistic intelligence, there's kinesthetic intelligence, right? There's a lot of different ways of sort of understanding and knowing about the world. And I think, Bina, to your question in terms of how this is connected to the Parsha, what makes Betzalel uniquely suited for this role is the fact that he has all of these different types of wisdom, which is not a given, right? To Renee's point just now, there can be people who have one type of intelligence or one type of wisdom, but don't necessarily have the others. And I think this verse is a reminder and a push for us to reflect a bit and say, okay, where do I have sort of some knowledge or some understanding or some wisdom, and where might I be lacking that? And how can I kind of take that as a charge to work on that within myself? And the other piece I'll say, sort of in terms of like you're asking the situation that we're in, I'm a bit shaken up because I'm dealing with it on a professional front. I won't get into it, but like there's a tendency now to read one piece of information and to have that drive you into action. I just read this on the news, or I just read this study, or I just read this thing, and I'm going to react at you about it, right? Like that is a common modality of interaction in the world right now. And I get it. And I have those impulses too, right? You read the study, you read the news story, you get the ping on your phone that makes you go crazy. And I think what this verse is saying is pause, take a deep breath. Right? You've gotten this piece of information. Okay. That is something you can learn about. That gives you a little more understanding or a little more insight into the world. And how can you try to integrate that into a deeper understanding, not just responding to that one piece of information, but to try to integrate it into a larger whole, and then to do that malacha, then to act from that place of kind of a higher, more integrated way of thinking about the world. And that is hard. That's not an easy thing to do, especially when we're bombarded with information, which then in turn, of course, makes it that much more important, right? The hard things are often the important things. So when we notice ourselves getting bombarded with information that's tough to sort through, to not just jump, to not just go because I read this, right? And we're all like on a hair trigger these days because of everything that's happening. Really tough. And so I think this verse is a reminder, and heading into Shabbat, like a reminder, say, pause, take a deep breath. What might be another side? What might be another way of understanding this? What might be a way of deepening this understanding? And then after doing that, to then act from that place of wisdom. I think that's one of the messages we can get from this verse, which is tough. And that's why we need the reminder. So I think. The other thing I'll say just as we wrap up is, Michael, that was a lovely comment. That's very kind of you. And for me, in terms of this class, what I love about this is that, I'll speak for myself. I do not always feel filled with the Spirit of God on a Friday morning. I hope that's not just too disillusioning to anybody. But it's through the interactions, right? It's through the conversation, I think, that we get to deeper insight, right? I think that's that's one of the main joys of this class, is that I have the stuff that I want to bring, and I wrap this up at 12 or 12:06. We're running late, like with a deeper understanding of what's going on because of the conversation. And that's a really beautiful thing. And I think also an important reminder that we don't do this alone, that we do this in partnership and in community. And that's really important too.
Amen.
Amen. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everyone. Hope to see you soon. And Bina, just sending you some extra love and strength. This is not an easy time for people who call the Ukraine home. So Ukraine is definitely in our minds and our hearts and our blessings. And I know that goes much deeper for you than it does for those of us who haven't lived there. So really thinking about you and hope that you can find moments of peace and quiet and real prayer over Shabbat.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.